Today, we're going to chat through graded cards and how there's a very interesting trend that would probably concern you with regards to a lack of competition and values of certain slabs coming down rather quickly. There's some trends that are happening that I think, should concern you, irrespective of whether you're a collector, investor, whatever it is that you are. Some of these things that we're going to discuss today should be a little bit concerning for the long term. Now, this is essentially an interesting conversation off the back of a topic we talked through, 2 days ago in my weekly news video where we did a bit of a reaction to Neo Cards and Comics in the video he put out with regards to BGS prices falling. And this specifically referred to the premiums that BGS 10s had over PSA 10s and BGS 9.5s had over PSA 9s. So historically, those BGS slabs had, premiums over those respective PSA slabs. But what, apps like Market Movers and a few other trend analysis apps essentially showed is, over the last, 2 to 3 years, and especially the last 12 months, these prices have started to fall. And these premiums have started to fall quite significantly, right? The gap is being closed. It's almost going to reach a point where PSA is going to overtake those. And this is interesting for a few reasons because it indicates something that's not really a surprise to any of you, and that is the fact that PSA is the preferred option for graders within, the hobby at the moment. Now, this hasn't always been the case. If you're someone like me that's been around for a long time, BGS used to be king. It wasn't until the pandemic that PSA overtook. But some of these trends we're starting to see now, are a little bit concerning. And I'll kick things off with the main talking point for today, and that is off the back of something that, Nash Cards put out today. Now, Nash Cards, they have 2 retail stores, I believe. It looks like they're opening one in Philadelphia very soon. But essentially, they're also a very big group submitter. They've got, I think, 30,000 followers on Instagram, as you can see over there. Their stores look quite big. They are quite prominent. And one of the things they announced today is that they're no longer going to accept group submissions and submit cards for grading at SGC or BGS, right? They're only going to focus in on PSA. And one of the things they talked to specifically was, gem rate data and how those trends spoke to a pretty clear reason for why they've decided to do this. Now, we have referenced gem rates and the volume of cards being graded at each of the graders a number of times over, the last few months, even the last 12 to 18 months actually. But to give you a bit of a recap, you can sort of see here for the month of May, PSA hit 1 million once again. SGC is number 2, as they have been for a number of months now, with 88 cards graded, 88k I should say, and then Beckett only 66k. And what Nash Cards talked to with regards to their decision to not group submit these anymore was that the ratio you're essentially seeing here, where the vast majority wants PSA only, was the same thing they were seeing. So essentially, from a business decision perspective, they weren't getting enough slabs in to justify them using this as a service, because they were probably losing money, i.e. not meeting the certain required cards based on customers submitting cards to go to these graders. So perhaps they had to submit some themselves, i.e. ruining their bottom line to an extent. And the thing I want to talk to you on today, that is the main purpose of this video, that I think is a little bit concerning long term, is what impacts this might have on the hobby, what impacts this might have on competition within the grading industry, what impacts will this have on us as, hobby participants, hobby customers, hobby collectors getting value from these businesses. Because if this trend, continues and it starts to happen at more and more businesses and more group submitters, that is going to leave us in a pretty dark spot, in my opinion. If more group submitters and more card stores are not getting sufficient submissions, from SGC, from BGS, to the point where they can no longer submit those, without, running at a loss, and they also stop cutting back on them, like we've seen with Nash Cards in this example. We've also seen it with some other stores over the last few months as well. That's pretty scary, in my opinion, because that's going to push, more of a preference towards PSA, even though PSA is maybe not doing the most consistent job at the moment. And if that, keeps going down that trend, what does that mean for existing BGS prices? What does that mean for existing SGC prices? If less and less of them start to enter the hobby, and there's less of a regard from, collectors and new participants within the hobby caring about those alternative graders, because, on face value, we've talked about this before, right? In my opinion, I think all the graders are fairly consistent with each other. Some are better than others. They alternate, they flip all the time. But for the most part, you should be buying the card, not the grade. So this emphasis to preference PSA over the rest is absolutely ludicrous, in my opinion. And when you've got people, starting to ignore these other ones, that's pretty concerning to me down the line, purely from, a valuation perspective, but also, and more importantly, from a competition perspective, because we need people to be challenging PSA. We need innovation within this industry, and without competition, you're not really going to get that. So I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this, because I think it's just an interesting trend that we're starting to see happen more and more. And I'm concerned about where it's going to essentially, lead, the prices of cards, because in the grand scheme of things, if you're still out there thinking that PSA is far and away the best purely because you're getting the best value right now, you're a little bit naive. You need to, apply diversification like we do with anything else in life, right? You can't just be focusing in on one company. Now, I also know that, BGS have had a lot of issues in the past, right? And I've talked to them how you shouldn't really be grading with them or anything like that. But that's, besides the point. Those are things that can be fixed at BGS, right? Historically, they haven't always had those kinds of issues either. So the fact that you're turning yourself off to these, other grading options and stores are starting to turn off to using them as well, we get less opportunities as customers. We get less value in return. And you're sort of selling yourself short because, like, who's to say, PSA in 6 months' time, information comes out that they've made, major stuff ups and the market, clicks and wakes up and says, well, you've got all these consistencies. I can see all these people saying you're making mistakes. Maybe we were silly to use PSA all the time. Or what if something else happens and BGS got a pretty big investment and they start, paying, some of these stores, some of these influencers to, use them as a group submitter exclusively, which means they no longer use PSA, which means because these guys are talking about it all the time, BGS becomes the favorite once again. What's that going to do to the people that have pushed all this PSA stuff and people that have, these entire collections and PSA slabs? Now, I'm not trying to say, don't use this company or don't use that company. You can do whatever the heck you want, like I always say. But I think, at some point we need to have a deeper discussion on this because things are going, down a pretty scary path. If we're going to see more and more businesses turning some of these graders away. I think it's absolutely shocking, in my opinion, to get to that point. Now, you can't blame Nash Cards for this, right? Because obviously not enough customers, value BGS or value SGC. Irrespective of what the values you're getting on return from these sales, SGC is a much more consistent grader than what PSA is at the moment, if you're looking at volume alone, right? SGC does a really good job with vintage cards as well. They offer a guarantee. Pete, their CEO, does a really good job, communicating things and rectifying issues when they do pop up as well. They're a very valid option for you as a collector. Maybe not as an investor right now, but you're getting very quick turnaround times as well. They're very transparent with a lot of things. They're a tangible option for you to use, if that's what you like. But the fact that people are turning away from that, I don't know. It just concerns me a little bit. So I'm really keen to get your thoughts on this because we're seeing, prices tank like we touched on at the very start with regards to these premiums that used to exist for BGS. If that gap continues and PSA, overtakes completely and more people start using them and these other graders stop getting customers coming towards them, they're going to have to do some drastic things to try and win you back as a customer, which might mean, cheaper grading options, faster turnaround times, etc. But if that trend continues and they don't make enough money off the back of that and they collapse and we're stuck with just PSA as the sole grader that people prefer and ISA doesn't get any love or TAG doesn't get any love either, CSG or CGC as we showed on the screen earlier, they don't get any love either, what's going to happen then? We're stuck with one grader, we're stuck with a monopoly that they can do whatever the heck they want, they can make all the mistakes that they want, nobody's going to hold them accountable, nobody's going to ask any questions, and you as a person that wants to buy a card in a high grade and now maybe going to have more cards graded inconsistently, right? You're going to have cards with 9s and 10s on them when they're far lower, purely because, PSA can get away with it because their standards have dropped because they have no competition. They want to pump through as many cards as possible. That's the path you're sort of going down if these trends continue. But it's not, all doom and gloom. These things we just touched on, could be a little bit concerning for the long term within this hobby, but there's some pretty interesting arbitrage opportunities to be had with regards to BGS slabs and SGC slabs right now. There's no surprise, as I've talked to in this video already, that these prices are falling. There's less and less preference from collectors and investors to want to buy cards in these graded, slabs, which is ridiculous in my opinion. But that means you right now, if you're an investor and you want to make some money, you can buy some of these, BGS slabs for relatively cheap compared to what they used to be and make some good coin, either cracking it and submitting it to PSA and making, a quick flip, or, flipping it down the line once, the preference returns to BGS or more collectors, become a bit more aware that, the premium for PSA is a little bit ludicrous. This is also a really cool opportunity for you as a collector to get some, some pretty cool cards in BGS slabs like BGS 9s or 9.5s, as an example, some flawless cards for cheap because people don't want to pay for them. And we've seen it happen, quite a lot over the last number of weeks, especially with some of the collectors that I've been talking to, some of my friends. There's some really good deals to be had, especially with BGS 9s. It's crazy how so many people have switched off to purchasing those, and the prices are so far down from where they have been that, outside of the arbitrage opportunity, just getting a cool graded card for your collection can be got right now with regards to BGS for fairly cheap. And it's a little bit funny when you look at back at, the same card in a BGS slab that was graded 4 years ago that had this pretty big premium on it, that premium's, washed away, and you can get that card for cents on the dollar, excluding, the rise and fall that we've had, since the pandemic happened. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, I'm really keen to get your thoughts. Quick shout out to ARH Sports and Splendor Sports Cards for, the topic today. We discussed this a couple of times over the last 24 hours. I wanted to get their thoughts on the whole situation. They brought it to my attention, or at least Steve Splendor did. Pretty interesting. We've talked about it a number of times, but it's just a really good discussion. So please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.